Nora Calloway had been sleeping in the back of a 2003 Honda Odyssey for 11 days when the letter found her. She had been parked behind a laundromat on Brevard Road in Asheville because the owner, a heavy-set man named Glenn who smelled permanently of fabric softener, had told her she could stay so long as she did not bother the customers and moved by 7 each morning. It was not generosity exactly. It was tolerance, the kind extended to someone who looks desperate enough to make you uncomfortable if you say no. Nora took it without hesitation. She had learned, in the 2 months since the eviction and the 3 months since the divorce, that pride was a luxury she could not afford. By the end of this story, I'm also going to share something special with those of you who stick around to the end, something that can help you in your personal life. But first, let's get back to. Her daughter Lily slept across the folded-down rear seats, cocooned in a sleeping bag printed with cartoon wolves that Nora had bought at a church sale for $4. Lily was 10 years old, brown-haired and serious-faced, with the kind of quiet that made adults underestimate how much she understood. She never cried about the van. She never asked why they could not go back to the house in Fletcher, the one with the yellow kitchen and the oak tree that shed its leaves in October like a slow orange fire. She just adapted, the way children do when they have no other choice, and that broke Nora's heart more than any amount of crying would have. The Odyssey had 238,000 miles on it. The passenger window did not seal properly and let in a thin thread of cold air that Nora had stuffed with a rolled towel every night since the temperature dropped. The heat worked, barely, when the engine was running, but she could not run the engine all night because she was watching the gas gauge the way a person watches a clock when they are already late. Every dollar mattered. Every gallon mattered. She had $214 left in her checking account and no job lined up, though she had handed out applications to 12 restaurants and 3 cleaning companies in the past week. She had a college degree. She had 6 years of experience managing operations for a printing company in Arden. She had a resume and references and a professional wardrobe stuffed in a garbage bag in the trunk. None of it had translated into a job offer yet, because every interview required a home address, and the address she had put on her applications, her friend Dana's apartment on Oak Street, had stopped being available 2 weeks ago when Dana's landlord found out someone was receiving mail there and threatened to report it. Lily went to school at Irwin Middle. Nora drove her there every morning at 7:45 and picked her up at 3:15, which gave her 6 hours in the middle of the day to apply for jobs, eat whatever was cheapest at the gas station, and use the library computer for free internet. She had not told Lily's teacher or the school counselor about the van. She was terrified, specifically and constantly, that someone would report her and that Lily would be taken. That fear sat in her chest like a stone she could not put down. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It came through the mail forwarding service she had set up after the eviction, addressed to Nora and Calloway, redirected from the Fletcher House address through 2 temporary stops before finally landing at the laundromat because she had asked Glenn, in a moment of desperation, if she could use his business address for mail. He had said yes, which was the second kindest thing he had done for her. He handed it to her that Tuesday morning without comment, a standard white envelope with a law firm return address printed in clean navy type. Caldwell and Marsh, attorneys at law, Waynesville, North Carolina. She opened it standing beside the van in the cold, Lily still asleep inside, condensation fogging the windows. The letter was short and formal. It informed her that she was named as the sole heir to the estate of one Harlan James Calloway, deceased, whose property included a parcel of land and a structure located at 9 Old Birch Road, Cedar Hollow, Madison County, North Carolina. She was asked to contact the office at her earliest convenience to arrange transfer of deed and receive further information. Nora read it 3 times. She turned it over as if there might be more on the back. She did not know anyone named Harlan Calloway. She knew almost nothing about her father's family, because her father, Robert Calloway, had left when she was 4 years old and never come back. Her mother, Sandra, had refused to speak of him or his people for the 25 years after that. Nora had grown up with her mother's maiden name on her tongue and her father's surname only on legal documents, a ghost of a lineage she had never been invited into. She had never met grandparents on that side, never received a birthday card, never been contacted by anyone named Calloway in her life. She called the law firm from the library that afternoon while Lily sat at the children's table doing homework. The attorney was a woman named Beverly Caldwell, older, with a precise and unhurried way of speaking. She confirmed the basics. Harlan Calloway had died 6 weeks ago at the age of 81. He had no surviving spouse, no other children, and no other identified heirs. He had left instructions with his attorney, instructions apparently in place for decades, that the property at Old Birch Road was to pass to Nora and Calloway, daughter of Robert James Calloway, upon his death. Who was he? Nora asked. Your paternal grandfather, Beverly said. Your father's father. Nora stood in the library staring at the water-stained ceiling. She had a grandfather. She had had a grandfather, for 81 years, living 45 minutes from where she had grown up, and not once in her entire life had anyone told her he existed. There is a deed to be transferred, Beverly continued. The property is yours outright. He owned it free and clear. No liens, no debts attached. I can have the paperwork ready by end of week. What kind of property? A cabin. Single structure on 11 acres. Remote. No electricity, no running water, no road access in winter if the snow is bad. It has not been lived in for some years, but the structure is sound. No electricity, no running water. Nora pressed her palm against the library's cold glass door and thought about the $214 in her checking account and the rolled towel in the van window and Lily doing homework 15 feet away without knowing her mother was shaking. Thank you, she said. I will come in Friday. She sat in the library for a long time after hanging up. She searched what she could find about Cedar Hollow online. A small community, barely a crossroads, up in the mountains of Madison County near the Tennessee border. Old Birch Road did not appear on any map she could find. She searched for Harlan James Calloway and found nothing except an obituary in the Madison County record, for sentences long, stating that he had died peacefully, that he had no surviving family, and that no service was planned. No surviving family. He had known she existed. He had left her property in his will, and he had let them print that he had no surviving family. She closed the computer and went to sit beside Lily, who looked up from her math worksheet and read her mother's face the way she always did, with that particular directness that had nowhere to hide. What is wrong? Nothing bad. Nora managed something close to a smile. Something strange. We might have a place to go. Lily looked at her steadily. A real place? Maybe. We are going to find out Friday. They drove to Waynesville on Friday morning, the Odyssey's heat running the whole way, and met Beverly Caldwell in her small office above a dry cleaner on Main Street. Beverly was in her late 60s, efficient and kind without being warm, and she walked them through the paperwork with a practiced thoroughness that made Nora feel, for the first time in months, that something official was being done on her behalf. The deed transferred into Nora's name in 30 minutes. Beverly gave her a hand-drawn map because Old Birch Road was not in any GPS database, and a single key on a plain metal ring. The key was old, heavier than expected, brass, slightly tarnished, with a long shaft and simple teeth. Not a modern lock. Did he say anything else? Nora asked. In his will or his instructions? Anything about why he left it to me? Beverly paused, choosing her words. He left a short letter, she said, but I was instructed to give it to you only after you had been to the property, not before. Why? She seemed to weigh how much to say. He was a careful man, she said finally. He wanted to make sure you went there before you made any decisions about what to do with it. I think he expected that seeing it would matter. Nora looked at the key in her hand. Beverly placed a sealed envelope on the desk. This is yours when you come back, she said. Take your time. The property will still be there. They found Old Birch Road by mid-afternoon. It branched off a gravel county road that itself branched off a state highway, and the turnoff was marked only by a rusted green post with no signage. The van ground slowly up the track, which climbed through dense second-growth forest, birch and poplar mostly, their bare November branches pale against a sky the color of old pewter. The track had not been maintained recently. 2 places required Nora to steer around fallen branches, and once the van scraped its undercarriage crossing a shallow stone ford. Lily sat in the front passenger seat, which she was allowed to do now because Nora said it was important she see where they were going. Her face was pressed against the window, watching the forest go by. It is far from everything, Lily said. Yes, like someone wanted it that way. Nora glanced at her. Maybe. The track ended in a small clearing about 100 yards across, ringed by old hemlocks that were brown-needled and dying from the woolly adelgid, the way nearly all the hemlocks in these mountains were dying slowly, and without drama. At the far end of the clearing stood the cabin. It was larger than Nora had expected. 2 stories, with a covered porch running the full width of the front and a stone chimney rising from each end. The logs were dark with age, their notched corners weathered tight and gray. The windows were small and shuttered, every one of them. The wooden shutters latched closed against whatever seasons had passed since the last person was here. The porch boards were sound, though moss had crept along their edges. A woodpile stacked against the cabin's east side had been there long enough that the bottom layer was half composted into the dirt. The clearing itself was not entirely wild. Under the dried weeds and dead grass, Nora could see evidence of old cultivation. A garden plot perhaps, or an orchard gone untended. 3 apple trees stood at the clearing's edge, leafless and unpruned, their branches gone crookedly skyward over years without care. Lily got out of the van and walked slowly toward the cabin, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. Nora followed, the key in her coat pocket, the hand-drawn map folded in her other hand, though they would not need it anymore. They stepped onto the porch together, the boards creaking once and then holding firm. Lily moved to examine the heavy front door, which was made from planks of what looked like chestnut wood, pale and close-grained. The door had 2 iron hinges and a large brass lock plate worn smooth by years of hands reaching for it. Then Lily went still. She crouched down, running her fingers along the lower section of the door frame where the wood met the door's edge. Nora came to stand beside her. Carved into the wood at knee height, in letters 1.5 inches tall, worn smooth and dark with age, was a single word. Calloway. Nora's hand moved to touch it before she thought about it. The carving was old, older than her. The edges were rounded with weathering, the letters settled deep into the grain. Mom. Lily looked up at her. Someone carved our name into the door. Nora could not speak for a moment. She traced each letter with one fingertip. The C and the A and the 2 L's and the O and the W and the A and the Y. 8 letters. Their name. The name of the man she had never met, who had known about her, who had died alone and called himself without family when he had put her name in his will years before anyone needed to use it. She took the key from her pocket and put it in the lock. It turned smoothly, the mechanism well-oiled, as though someone had been here not so long ago and made sure the lock would work when it needed to. The door swung inward on its hinges without sound. The air that came out was cold and still and smelled of cedar and pine pitch and something else beneath those, something dry and old like the inside of a church that has not been heated in years. They stepped inside. The main room was large. A stone fireplace dominated the east wall, its hearth clean swept, a small stack of wood laid ready to burn as if whoever had been here last expected someone to return and need a fire quickly. A rough-hewn table sat in the center of the room with 2 chairs pulled up to it, their seats covered in dust. Shelves ran along the south wall from floor to ceiling, crowded with tools and boxes and jars and books, all of it organized with a precision that made Nora think of a person who lived by systems, who placed each thing once and expected it to stay. Lily walked to the shelves and looked without touching. A kerosene lantern, several tin canisters with handwritten labels, a row of books with worn spines, field guides and almanacs, and one that looked like a ledger. A cast-iron pot hanging on a hook beside the fireplace. A folded wool blanket on the single wooden chair nearest the hearth. It does not look abandoned, Lily said. No, Nora agreed. It did not. It looked like a place someone had prepared to be found. A door on the north wall led to a small kitchen with a hand pump over a deep stone sink and shelves of preserved goods, canning jars in rows, their contents still identifiable through the glass. Green beans, tomatoes, something dark that might have been blackberries. Below the kitchen counter was a door to a cellar, its wooden steps descending into darkness. A ladder on the east wall led up through an open hatch to the second floor. Nora climbed it and found a single sleeping room with a narrow bed, a small trunk, and 2 shuttered windows. The bed was made, blanket folded back, pillow centered, with the particular tidiness of someone who had been doing it alone for a long time. On the trunk sat a framed photograph. Nora picked it up. The glass was dusty but uncracked. In the photograph, a man stood in the clearing outside, the cabin visible behind him. He was perhaps 50, lean and weathered, with dark eyes and a set to his jaw she recognized without knowing why. He was holding a small girl on his hip, maybe 4 or 5 years old, brown-haired and laughing at something off camera. Nora stared at the girl's face for a long moment. She carried the photograph down the ladder and showed it to Lily. Who are they? I do not know. Nora's voice came out quieter than she intended. The man might be him. My grandfather. Who is the girl? Nora looked at the photograph again. The girl's face was familiar in a way she could not explain, the way a voice is familiar before you can place it. She set the photograph on the table and walked through the cabin again, more slowly this time, looking at everything with new attention. The shelves were not random. The books were arranged by subject, the tools by size. The canning jars were labeled with years, some going back to 1987. The tin canisters held flour and cornmeal and dried beans, still usable if the seals were good. She found a workbench along the cabin's west wall, behind a half door she had initially taken for a closet. On the bench were woodworking tools laid out with the same precision as everything else, chisels in a leather roll, planes hanging from pegs, a hand saw mounted on the wall with its teeth covered in oiled cloth. Wood shavings lay on the floor, still pale, not darkened by long exposure. This bench had been used within the past year, maybe less. Harlan had died 6 weeks ago. Beverly had said the cabin had not been lived in for some years, but someone had been here more recently than that. The lock had been recently oiled. The wood shavings were fresh. The canning jars were dated up to 2 years ago. Nora stood in the middle of the workroom and turned slowly. In the corner behind the workbench, partially hidden by a hanging canvas tarp, she saw the edge of a trapdoor built into the floorboards. The seam was cut cleanly, the lines too precise to be accidental. She did not open it. Not yet. She went back to the main room, where Lily had found the ledger on the shelf and was sitting at the table with it open, turning pages carefully. What is that? Lily looked up. It is like an account book. Numbers and dates. But also other things, notes. She turned the book to show her mother. This page is all columns, money it looks like. But this page is a letter. Nora took the book and read the page Lily had indicated. The handwriting was small and precise. The letters formed with the care of someone who had learned to write deliberately and wrote that way always. The entry was dated March 14th, 11 years ago. I put the second box in the lower chamber today. The seals are holding. Cedar keeps the moisture out better than I expected. If she ever comes and looks, she will find everything in the order I intended. If she does not come, then I have wasted my life on stubbornness, which would not be the first time. I named the property to her because she is all that is left of Robert, and Robert was all that was worth keeping from everything I did wrong. I do not ask forgiveness. I just want her to have what she is owed. Nora read it twice. She is all that is left of Robert. Robert was her father. Her hands were not shaking now. Something steadier had moved in under the shock, something that felt almost like recognition, like a part of her that had always known a version of this story and was now finding out it was real. Lily watched her mother's face. What does it say? That he knew about me. Nora's voice was steady. He knew I existed. He was leaving me something. More than the cabin? She looked at her daughter. I think so. They spent an hour going through the cabin before the light began to fail. Without electricity, the space grew dark quickly as the sun dropped behind the hemlocks. Nora lit the kerosene lantern from the shelf, and its warm yellow light pushed back the dark just enough to work by. She found 4 more ledgers on the shelves, earlier ones, dated back to the 1970s. She found a tin box of photographs, dozens of them, going back to what looked like the 1950s. She found a canvas bag hanging on a peg near the back door, inside of which were 4 envelopes sealed with wax, her name written on each of them in the same careful hand as the ledger. She did not open them yet. Beverly had told her to see the property first, and she understood now that Beverly had been right. She needed to be standing here, in this space, before any of what those envelopes said would make sense. The trapdoor in the workroom bothered her. She went back to it as the last light faded and crouched to look at its edges. The cut was precise and the hinges were mounted flush on the underside, so they did not show from above. The door sat in a recessed frame that made it nearly invisible from a standing position. Only from the corner, at the right angle, could you see the seam at all. There was a small iron ring countersunk into the wood. Nora pulled on it, and the door lifted smoothly, silently, opening on well-maintained hinges to reveal a set of stone steps descending into darkness. The smell that rose was cedar and iron and dry cold air. She needed a better light before going down. She had a flashlight in the van. She closed the trapdoor and went outside to retrieve it, the November cold hitting her face like cold water after the cabin's dim interior. She stood in the clearing for a moment and looked around. The road they had driven in on was a pale line disappearing into the trees. The hemlocks stood like columns in the failing light. The clearing was very quiet. Only the dry rattle of dead leaves and once, far off, the single call of a crow. She was almost back to the van when she saw it. At the edge of the clearing, where the gravel track met the tree line, there was a fresh tire track pressed deep into the mud. One set, wide-treaded, from a vehicle larger than the Odyssey. It had not been there when they drove in. She was certain of that, because she had been watching the road carefully the whole way up, watching for soft spots and hidden stones, and the mud at the clearing's edge had been smooth when they arrived. Someone had driven to the edge of the clearing, stopped, and turned around. Within the last 2 hours, while she and Lily had been inside. Nora looked at the track for a long moment without moving. Then she got the flashlight from the van and went back inside and locked the cabin door behind her. She told Lily they would stay the night. The fireplace had wood already laid. She lit it, and the cabin filled with the particular warmth of a wood fire, the kind that reaches differently than any other heat, something old and recognized and good. Lily helped her find bedding in the trunk upstairs and bring it down to the main room where they could sleep near the fire. "It is nice here," Lily said, sitting close to the fire with her knees pulled to her chest. "Really nice." "It is," Nora agreed. "Could we stay?" Nora thought about the tire tracks at the clearing's edge. She thought about the sealed trapdoor and the envelopes with her name on them and the ledger entry about boxes in a lower chamber. "I think we might have to." She did not sleep much. She lay awake watching the fire and listening to the sounds of the forest beyond the shuttered windows. Once, around midnight, she thought she heard a car engine somewhere distant down the mountain, starting and then going quiet. She could not be certain. The mountains play tricks with sound. Lily slept deeply beside her, her face lit orange by the dying fire, looking younger in sleep than she ever looked awake, looking like the child she was instead of the watchful person she had become. Nora got up before dawn and added wood to the fire. Then she sat at the table with the ledger open to Harlan's letter and read it again. "I want her to have what she is owed." When the light grew strong enough, she took the 4 sealed envelopes from the canvas bag, set them in front of her in the order they were numbered, and opened the first one. The paper inside was heavy and cream-colored, folded twice. The writing was the same careful hand from the ledger, but slower here, as though the person writing had been older when he wrote it, the letters slightly larger and less precise. "Nora," it began, "there is no version of this letter I can write without shame, so I will not try to hide behind apology. What I did to your father, and by extension to you, was wrong. I knew about you from the time you were born. Your father called me from the hospital when you arrived, and I told him I wanted nothing to do with any child of his, not while he was living the way he was, running from every responsibility I had ever tried to give him. That was my failure speaking, not wisdom. I want you to understand that so you do not spend time wondering what you did wrong. You did nothing wrong. You were 6 days old." Nora stopped reading. She pressed both palms flat against the table. Outside, through the shut windows, a bird had started singing. Something small, a winter wren maybe, running through its long, complicated song in the cold. She picked the letter back up. "Your father and I did not speak for years after that. By the time I tried to reach him, he had moved on and left no way to find him. I hired someone to locate you once, when you were 7 years old. He found you in Hendersonville, living with your mother, going to school, apparently all right. I told myself that was enough, that I had no right to come into your life and disrupt what you had built without me. That was also wrong. It was cowardice, and I am sorry for it. I have been working since 1974 to build something that would have meaning. When you were a child, I told myself I was doing it for the land, for the work itself. When you were an adult, I admitted I was doing it for you, because it was the only thing left I knew how to do that might matter. What I have built is underneath this cabin in a space I sealed and prepared for this purpose. The first key is in the top left drawer of the workbench. The second is on the ledge above the cellar door. You will need both. Go carefully. Take your time. What you find there took 50 years to build and is not going anywhere in an afternoon." Nora put the letter down and looked at the workbench door. Lily was awake now, sitting up in her bedding with her hair flattened on one side, watching her mother. "What does it say?" "There is something underneath the cabin," Nora said. Something he left me. Like buried treasure? Nora got up and walked to the workbench. She pulled open the top left drawer. Inside, on a piece of folded cloth, sat a key. It was different from the door key, smaller, with a more complex bit, the kind made for a serious lock rather than a common one. Something like that, she said. She found the second key on the ledge above the cellar door exactly as the letter described. Then she went to the trapdoor in the workbench corner and lifted it again, the stone steps descending into the smell of cedar and iron. She clicked on the flashlight. Lily was beside her before she asked, "I am coming." Nora looked at her daughter and decided not to argue about it. She went down first, the flashlight cutting a white path through the dark, and Lily followed close enough that Nora could feel her breath on the back of her neck. The steps went down 8 feet and ended at a stone floor. The space was low-ceilinged and wider than she expected, the walls lined with shelves built from heavy timbers. The cedar smell was strong here, almost medicinal. And on the shelves, arranged with the same precision as everything in the cabin above, were boxes. Metal boxes with padlocks. Wooden crates with fitted lids sealed with wax. Tin containers stacked 3 high with labels in Harlan's handwriting. Along the far wall, 2 doors set into the stone, both with heavy padlocks. Lily turned slowly in the low space, her eyes wide, taking everything in. Nora looked at the 2 keys in her hand. She looked at the sealed boxes and the crates and the 2 locked doors. 50 years, she thought. He said 50 years. She did not open anything yet. She took photographs with her phone, moving slowly around the space, capturing each shelf and label and door. Then she went back upstairs and sat at the table with the remaining 3 envelopes. The second envelope held a single typed page that looked like a legal document, dense with language she would need help to interpret, but at the top it bore the heading Last Will and Testament of Harlan James Calloway, and her name appeared in the second paragraph. The third envelope held a handwritten list, 12 pages long, of items described in short, precise entries. Each entry had a date, a source, a description, and an estimated value. She read the first dozen. 1978, purchased, 14 American Double Eagle gold coins, estimated value at time of purchase $11,400, current value approximate $28,000. 1981, purchased, 37 Morgan silver dollars, estimated value at time of purchase $3,700, current value approximate $12,000. 1984, purchased, 11 pieces American art glass, Tiffany, estimated value at time of purchase $22,000, current value approximate $310,000. 1987, purchased, 214 acres of mineral rights, Madison County, Burke County, estimated value at time of purchase $14,000, current value approximate $1. For million. Nora stopped and stared at the page. She turned to the next entry, and the next, and the next. The list went on for 12 pages. Gold and silver coins, land rights and mineral leases, paintings and art glass, bonds and certificates, stamps and protective sleeves, a collection of pre-Civil War documents, Cherokee silver work, a Civil War diary, antique instruments, old maps, each entry noted with the same quiet precision, purchased, estimated value, current value approximate. She could not add it up. The numbers ran together when she tried. The fourth envelope had no letter inside. It held a photograph. It was the same photograph she had found upstairs on the trunk in the sleeping room. The man holding the small girl, the cabin in the background. But this copy was larger, a full 8 by 10, and on the back, in handwriting she did not recognize, softer and more hurried than Harlan's, were the words, Harlan and Nora, summer 1994. She does not know this was taken. She was 3 years old. Nora read it 3 times. Then she turned the photograph over and looked at the child's face again. It was her. She was 3 years old, and she was laughing at something off camera, and her grandfather was holding her on his hip with the ease of someone who had done it 100 times and expected to do it 1,000 more. She had been here. She did not remember it. She had been 3, but she had been here, at this cabin, held by this man she had grown up believing did not exist. Lily sat across the table, watching her mother's face. She did not speak. She just waited, which was the most generous thing she knew how to do. Outside, the winter light was pale and still. The fire had settled to coals, and the cabin was cooling, but neither of them moved to add wood. The crow called again somewhere in the hemlocks, that same single note, and the wren answered, complicated and insistent. Nora put the photograph down carefully and looked at her daughter. "I was here when I was younger than you are," she said. "I did not remember it." Lily looked at the photograph. "He knew you. He knew me." Nora's voice was steady. "And he built something for me, down in that room below us, for 50 years. She paused. "I do not know yet what it is worth, but we are going to find out." Before we find out what happened next in the story, I want to take a brief moment to speak directly to anyone watching who might be going through their own sudden, overwhelming transition. If you are navigating a bitter divorce, the loss of a spouse, or a financial shock, you know the hardest part isn't just the money. It's not knowing what to do first. That is exactly why we created the Phoenix Blueprint. It is a practical, step-by-step guide for starting over. It doesn't have fluffy affirmations or vision boards. It is a tactical survival manual. It gives you the exact checklist for the first 48 hours, including the one rule you must follow. Do not make any decision you cannot reverse. It includes the Found Money worksheet, showing you exactly how to check state databases because 1 in 7 Americans actually has unclaimed money waiting for them right now. It even gives you word-for-word boundary scripts to use when family members pressure you for money or try to make decisions for you. You can get the entire guide right now for just $17. If you're watching on your TV, just pull out your phone, open your camera, and scan the QR code on the screen right now. If you're on a computer or phone, click the top link in the description. You don't have to figure this out alone. Now, let's get back to the story. She picked up her phone and found Beverly Caldwell's number. The attorney answered on the second ring. "I have been to the cabin," Nora said. "I have read the first letter and the will and the list. I need you to come up here, and I need you to bring someone who can help me understand what I am looking at. I think it is large. I think it may be very large." Beverly was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I thought you might call today. You knew about the list?" "Not the details. But Harlan spent his last appointment with me telling me to make sure his granddaughter had time to go to the property before anyone else did. He was particular about that." The word anyone covered quite a bit of ground in the way he used it. Nora thought about the tire tracks at the clearing's edge, the mud pressed deep by a vehicle that had come and turned around while she and Lily were inside. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Beverly said carefully, "that there are people who have been trying to find out what Harlan had for a long time. And now that he is gone, they will move faster." "Who?" "His former business partner, a man named Gerald Fitch. He and Harlan had a falling out about 15 years ago. Fitch claimed Harlan had cheated him out of significant assets. There were legal proceedings, but Harlan won. Fitch has been making inquiries since the death, asking about the estate, asking about what the property contained. He does not know about you yet, not your full name or how to find you, but that will not last." Nora looked at the trapdoor in the workroom floor, the 2 locked doors in the room below, the 12 pages of careful inventory. "Come today," she said. "Come by a road other than the one marked on your map, if there is one. And call me before you arrive, so I know it is you. There is an old logging track off the county line. I will be there by 2. Nora hung up and looked at Lily, who had been listening to all of it with her hands flat on the table and her face very still. "Are we in trouble?" Lily asked. Nora thought about it honestly, the way her daughter deserved. "Maybe," she said, "but we are also in the right place. This is ours. It was built for us. And we are not leaving." Lily held her eyes for a moment, measuring. Then she nodded, stood up, and went to add wood to the fire as though that was the natural next thing to do, which it was. Nora turned back to the 12-page list and began, for the first time, to add the numbers up. The figures were staggering even in rough edition. She went through the list line by line, rounding down to be conservative, writing each figure in the margin of the envelope. Gold and silver coins alone ran to something near $6 million at current prices. The mineral rights across 4 counties were harder to calculate without knowing current market rates, but even conservatively they suggested tens of millions. The art glass was the most arresting. 81 pieces documented across the list, purchased between 1981 and 2003, with estimated current values ranging from $200,000 to $800,000 per piece. She put the list down after the first 4 pages because her hand was shaking and she needed to stop and breathe. She thought about the 2 locked doors in the chamber below. The list only covered items small enough to document on paper. The doors below led somewhere. Whatever was behind them was not on any list she had found yet. She opened the earliest ledger on the shelf, dated 1974. The first entry was January 3rd. Bought 40 acres of ridge land above Cedar Hollow today from the Hensley family, who needed cash and did not want to negotiate. Paid $6,200. Value is in the timber, and what I expect will be mineral underneath, though I have not tested yet. I have been thinking about what it means to build something that outlasts you and what it means to build something for no one, and I do not want to build for no one. Robert will not come home. I understand that now. But if he ever has children, they will need something. This is the start of it. Her father would have been perhaps 20 years old. Harlan had already stopped expecting him to return. But he had started building anyway, for Robert's children, for someone who did not exist yet. Nora was born in 1990. Harlan had been building for 16 years before she arrived in the world. She went through the ledgers quickly, skimming entries, watching the accumulation. The 40s grew to hundreds. The hundreds grew to thousands. Through the 80s and 90s, the entries described larger and more varied acquisitions, always with the same careful documentation of cost and source and expected future value. He did not write about himself much. He did not describe how he felt or what he wanted. He documented. He recorded. He planned. One entry from 1996 stopped her. Robert's girl is 6 years old. I drove past her mother's house last month. Did not stop. The child was playing in the yard, dark-haired, serious-looking. She had my mother's eyes. I do not know what I owe her that I could give now without causing more damage than I have already done, so I keep building. That has to be enough. She had been 6 years old. He had watched her play in the yard and driven away, and then come home to this cabin and written about it in his ledger before going back to work. The fire was burning steadily. Lily had settled near the hearth with a field guide to Appalachian birds open on her lap, apparently absorbed, though Nora knew she was also listening to everything. The morning passed. Nora made a slow circuit of the underground chamber again with the flashlight, this time examining every shelf carefully, reading labels, handling nothing. The tin containers were numbered and appeared to cross-reference the list she had found upstairs. The metal boxes bore padlock numbers that presumably matched some key system she had not found yet. The wooden crates were sealed and dated by year. The two doors at the far end of the chamber were built into the stone itself. The stone around them was fitted and cut precisely, different from the rougher stone of the main walls. Someone had built these walls specifically to house these doors. This had not been improvised. It had been designed over years and done deliberately. She stood in front of the right-hand door and looked at the padlock. Heavy, steel, the kind meant for a security gate. She took the smaller of her two keys and tried it. It slid in and turned, and the padlock opened. Behind the door was a room perhaps 12 feet deep and 8 feet wide, the walls lined with steel shelving units bolted to the stone. The shelves held document boxes, the archival kind with fitted lids, each labeled with a category and a year range. One label read property deeds, another mineral rights, another financial instruments, another contracts and agreements. She counted 42 boxes on those shelves. Along the floor, stacked too high, were flat fireproof cases with combination locks. There were 9 of them. She left the room without touching anything and closed the door. Beverly arrived at 2:10, coming up the logging track from the north as she had promised. She had brought a woman with her, introduced as Carolyn Tate, an estate attorney from Asheville who specialized in asset valuation. Carolyn was in her 40s, practical-looking and unhurried, with a leather case full of blank inventory forms and a calm professional manner that made Nora feel, for the second time, that something official was being done on her behalf. They stood on the porch while Beverly explained what she knew. Harlan had been a client for 30 years. He had visited her office once a year, every year, to update his will and his documentation. He had never told her specifics of what the estate contained, only that it was substantial. He had been specific about wanting the estate transferred quickly and quietly, without public probate proceedings if possible, which Beverly had arranged through a small estate filing that did not require a public inventory. He was careful, Beverly said. He had reasons to be. Fitch, Nora said. Beverly nodded. Gerald Fitch. He and Harlan went into business together in the late 1980s, timber rights and land brokerage. The partnership ended badly in 2009. Fitch claimed Harlan had withheld significant assets that should have been shared. There were legal proceedings, but Harlan won. Fitch has been resentful ever since. Since Harlan's death, he has filed 2 inquiries with Madison County about the property value and whether the estate was going through public probate. He was here, Nora said. Last evening, while we were inside. Someone drove to the edge of the clearing and turned around. Beverly and Carolyn exchanged a look. Then we should move faster than I had planned, Beverly said. They spent the afternoon in the underground chamber. Carolyn opened each container methodically, photographed, documented, created preliminary valuations based on her knowledge of current markets. She had done this work before, clearly. She moved with efficiency, pausing occasionally to check values on her phone and consult databases. Beverly sat at Harlan's table upstairs and went through the ledgers, building a timeline. Lily made herself useful carrying items between floors, keeping a tally in her own notebook, noting each item Carolyn photographed and the number assigned to it. By 4 in the afternoon, when the light was failing again and Nora had lit 3 lanterns to keep the rooms workable, Carolyn climbed the stairs from the chamber and sat down across from Nora at the table. I need to give you a preliminary figure, she said. It is incomplete because we have not opened the second door yet, and we have not accessed the fireproof cases, but based on what I have been able to document today, I am looking at an estate value somewhere between $350 million and $450 million. The uncertainty is in the mineral rights, because current market prices make them worth considerably more than your grandfather estimated when he purchased them, and I would want a specialist to confirm that. Nora looked at her. That range, Carolyn continued quietly, is likely to move upward when we open the second door, not downward. Whatever he kept behind it, he kept separately and locked more securely. In my experience, that means the most significant items. Nora sat with that for a moment. For $100 million. She had gone to sleep 11 nights ago in the back of a van behind a laundromat on Brevard Road, and she would go to sleep tonight in a cabin on a mountain with a wood fire and 11 acres of land, and a locked room below her feet that a careful, guilty, lonely man had spent 50 years filling for a grandchild he had watched from a distance and never reached. What happens now? She asked. Beverly looked up from the ledgers. Now we establish full legal ownership and move the documentation to a secure location. We do it quickly, before Fitch can file any kind of claim against the estate. He has no legal standing. He lost his case in 2009 and the statute of limitations has long passed. But a spurious claim, even one with no merit, can slow things down and create noise. Noise is what we want to avoid, Carolyn agreed. Lily was standing in the workroom doorway, her tally notebook in her hand, listening. How long will it take? Nora asked. Beverly considered. If everything proceeds cleanly, 6 to 8 weeks for full probate. The deed and initial asset transfer can be done within 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Nora looked around the cabin, at the shelves organized with 50 years of patient care, at the fireplace with its ready-laid wood, at the photograph of herself as a 3-year-old being held by a man she had not known was her grandfather. Then we stay here, she said, until it is done. Beverly nodded. I thought you would say that. There is one other thing. She reached into her briefcase and took out the sealed envelope she had described at her office 4 days ago. He was very specific that you read this after seeing the property. Nora took it. She recognized the handwriting. She did not open it yet. She held it and looked at the fire, at her daughter, at the darkening windows. Outside, in the November cold, the clearing was quiet. The hemlock shadows were long and still. The old track wound down through the forest to the county road, and beyond that to the world that did not know any of this was here, the world that thought Nora Calloway was a woman with $214 in her checking account, and a sleeping bag in a van, and no family, and no future worth speaking of. They were wrong about that. They had been wrong about it for a long time. She set the envelope on the table in front of her, beside the photograph of herself at 3 years old, and she looked at her daughter. Tomorrow, she said. We open the second door tomorrow. Tonight we stay warm. Lily sat down across from her and opened her notebook to a fresh page. I will keep the count, she said, for whatever we find. Outside in the cold dark, at the far edge of the clearing where the gravel track ended and the forest began, a pair of headlights appeared briefly at the tree line, held there for a moment, and then went out. Neither of them saw it. But the crow, somewhere in the dead hemlocks above the clearing, called once into the dark and went silent. Nora was sitting at the table before the sky had fully lightened, the fourth envelope in front of her. She had been awake since before 4. The fire had dropped to coals, and the cabin was cold again, her breath visible in the dim air. Lily slept on beside the dead fire, her face turned toward the wall, peaceful in the way only children can be peaceful in an unfamiliar place. Beverly and Carolyn had driven back down the mountain the evening before, promising to return in the morning with more help. They had taken photographs of the first underground room and the preliminary inventory. They had locked the chamber door and left the key with Nora. She had sat for an hour after they left, just looking at the cabin walls. The fourth envelope was the one she had not opened the day before, the one that had held the photograph. She had taken the photograph out and read the words on the back, and she had not been able to open the letter inside it. Not then, not with Beverly and Carolyn still there, and the afternoon still full of numbers and procedures. She opened it now in the quiet and the cold. The handwriting was Harlan's, but late. The late version she had seen in the most recent ledger entries. The letters larger and slower and slightly uneven. The hand of a man in his late 70s writing something he had been putting off for a long time. Nora, this letter is the one I have written and thrown away more times than any other. If you are reading it, then I finally got it right, or close enough that I stopped throwing it away. I want to tell you about your father. Robert was 18 years old when he left home. He left because I drove him out. I was not a cruel man in the ordinary sense. I did not drink. I did not hit him. What I did was harder to name and harder to forgive. I had a picture in my head of what my son should be, what kind of man, what kind of work, what kind of life, and when Robert showed no interest in becoming that picture, I treated his choices like failures. Not once, not occasionally, constantly and consistently for 18 years, until the morning he told me he was leaving and I told him he could go and stay gone. He called me twice after that. The first time to tell me he had met someone and was happy. I said that was good and then said nothing else worth saying. The second call came from a hospital in Henderson, the night you were born. He asked if I wanted to come and I told him no. I told him no. I want you to know that I have spent every year since that phone call trying to understand the man who said that, and I have never fully managed it. The best I can offer you is this. I was afraid. Not of your mother, not of you. Afraid that if I went to that hospital and held you and looked at my son's face over you, I would have to admit how much I had lost by being who I was, and I was not ready to admit that. By the time I was ready, I had no way to reach him. He drifted after that. I kept track from a distance, the way I kept track of you. I know he moved to Tennessee sometime in the 90s. I know he remarried. I know he died in 2018, a construction accident in Knoxville. I went to his grave once, alone, and I did not know what to say, so I said nothing. I stood there for an hour and then drove home. What I built here was not penance. I am too old for the comfort of that word. It was the only act of love I knew how to perform after I had made every other act impossible. I am not asking you to receive it as love. Receive it however you need to. The second room holds the bulk of what I built. The key to it is inside the spine of the 1974 ledger, sewn into the binding. It is a smaller key, flat, brass, with a notch filed in the lower edge. The combination to the floor safe inside the room is the year I started building plus the year I found out you had been born, 1974 and 1990. Together, 19741-990. Whatever you find. There, take it and use it well. Not for me. For the life you are building now, whatever that life is. One more thing. There is a man named Gerald Fitch who has believed for 15 years that I owed him a share of something I built before we were ever in business together. He is wrong, legally and in every other sense. But he is persistent, and he has resources, and he will come looking the moment he knows you exist. Beverly Caldwell has everything she needs to stop him, but you will need to let her. Do not try to manage Fitch yourself. He is the kind of man who mistakes courtesy for weakness. I am sorry I was not the grandfather you should have had. I am sorry I was not the father your father deserved. I hope that what I have left can do some of the work I failed to do while I was alive. Harlan James Calloway. Nora folded the letter and sat with it in her hands. Outside the clearing was lightening slowly, the pale shapes of the hemlocks coming out of the dark one at a time. A chickadee called somewhere in the trees. One clear note repeated, the most ordinary sound in the world. She got up, found the 1974 ledger on the shelf, and felt along the binding. About halfway down the spine, under her fingertips, she felt a slight stiffness, a thickening in the leather that was not natural to the material. She took the small knife from her pocket and worked at the stitching carefully, and after a few minutes the binding opened slightly, and a flat brass key tipped out into her palm. A notch filed in the lower edge, just as he had described. She stood there holding it and thought about a man in his 30s sewing a key into a book with the certainty that he would not be alive to use it, building something into the fabric of his life that was meant to outlast him. Building it for a child he had never met, because of a phone call he had gotten wrong, because the only direction his guilt knew how to move was forward. Lily woke up while she was adding wood to the fire. She sat up and pushed her hair back and looked at her mother with the direct morning alertness that never required warming up. "You read it?" "Yes." "What did it say?" Nora looked at her daughter. "He told me why he and my father stopped speaking. And he told me where the key to the second room is." Lily looked at the key in Nora's hand. That one. That one. Are we going down before Beverly gets here?" Nora thought about what else was in the letter. "No. Beverly should be here." She paused. "Fitch is coming. Harlan warned me in the letter. He said not to try to manage him myself." Lily accepted this without drama. She went to the kitchen shelf, found 2 tin mugs, and pumped water at the hand pump. She set one in front of her mother and sat down with the other. They waited together in the early light. Beverly arrived with Carolyn just after 8, the silver sedan picking its way up the logging track through a light frost that had settled overnight. They were not alone. A third vehicle followed, a blue pickup from which a tall man in his 50s climbed with a case of equipment. Beverly introduced him as Ben Hartley, a certified appraiser out of Asheville who specialized in rare metals and historical documents. He shook Nora's hand once and went straight to looking at the cabin walls with the assessing focus of a man who bills by the hour and intends to earn it. Beverly's expression when she stepped onto the porch was tighter than the day before. She looked at Nora directly. "I need to tell you something before we go in." Nora waited. "Gerald Fitch filed a motion in Madison County Court yesterday afternoon. He is claiming that Harlan verbally promised him a 50% share of whatever assets were held on this property, in exchange for investment capital provided in 1988. He is asking for a court order halting any transfer of the estate pending a hearing." Nora had expected something, but not this quickly. "Can he do that?" "He can file it. He cannot stop the deed transfer because that was recorded the day we left Waynesville and is now legally complete. But he can attempt to freeze the contents of the estate, the physical property in that room, while the case is heard." Beverly paused. "It will not succeed. I am certain of that. But it could take 30 to 60 days to resolve, and during that time we need to be careful about what we move and how we document it." "How did he find out so fast?" Beverly looked at the clearing and then back at Nora. "Someone is feeding him information. I do not know who yet." Nora thought about the tire tracks in the mud 2 nights ago. The headlights at the tree line. He has been watching the property. "Almost certainly." Beverly squared her shoulders. "My advice is we proceed today with a complete and official inventory of the second room, documented by Carolyn and Ben, witnessed by me, and we file it with the court before close of business. If everything is inventoried and on record, Fitch cannot claim we have tampered with or concealed anything, which I expect will be his first accusation when we reach the hearing." Nora looked at the carved name on the doorframe. "Then let us go in." The key from the 1974 ledger fit the second door's padlock with a precision that felt almost personal, as though Harlan had cut the lock to that specific key with this exact moment in mind. The padlock opened. The door swung inward. The smell that came out was different from the first room, colder, drier, with something underneath the cedar smell that was metallic and clean. Ben Hartley went in first with his equipment, methodical and unhurried, setting up portable lights that ran off a battery pack and cast the space in steady white illumination. What those lights revealed was different from the first room in every respect. The first room had been a document room. This one was a vault. The shelves along the north and east walls held rows of sealed metal containers, each one labeled. But the south wall stopped everyone in the doorway. Against the south wall, on heavy steel racking bolted directly into the stone, sat gold. Not coins. Not jewelry. Bars. Stacked in rows of 5, 4 bars per row, each bar roughly the size of a hardback book, their surfaces a dull, unreflective yellow under the white lights. They had the quality of something that does not care whether it is seen or not, a permanence that owed nothing to attention. Ben Hartley looked at the south wall for a long moment and then looked at his clipboard. "I will need to verify purity," he said, "but based on dimensions and weight estimates, I am looking at approximately 240 standard bars. At current spot price, that is somewhere in the range of $50 to $55 million in bullion alone." No one spoke for a moment. Carolyn was already photographing. Beverly had her notepad. Lily stood in the doorway because she had not yet decided whether to step inside, her own notebook pressed against her chest. Nora walked slowly along the south wall, looking at the bars without touching them. Each one had a small paper tag attached by wire, a date and a purchase notation in Harlan's handwriting. He had been buying gold since 1978, 2 or 3 bars per year, sometimes 4 in a good year, stacking them on this shelf for over 40 years like a man placing stones in a wall one at a time, certain the wall would eventually be worth something. She turned to the other shelves. The metal containers were labeled in categories she had not seen on the first room list. Cherokee silver, documented acquisition, 14 pieces, 1979 to 1997. Original land grants, Madison County, 1803 to 1867. Civil War currency and bonds, Confederate and Union, 23 pieces. Appalachian craft work, pre-1900, 61 items. Historical correspondence, 19th century, approximately 200 letters. Each category had an authentication folder clipped to the shelf beside it. Manila folders thick with provenance documents, receipts, certificates, and previous appraisal records. Harlan had not only collected these things, he had proven them, over and over, for decades, anticipating exactly the kind of scrutiny that a dead man's hidden fortune would inevitably attract. Ben was moving along the shelves with an efficiency that spoke of long practice, opening containers, inspecting contents, making notes in a quiet running commentary to himself. Carolyn worked a parallel path behind him, photographing everything he touched. The room was quiet except for the sound of their work and the occasional notation spoken aloud for the record. At the center of the room's floor, set flush into the stone with a steel surround, was a safe. Floor model, heavy, combination dial. Nora crouched beside it and looked at the numbers. She thought of what Harlan had written. The year he started building plus the year he found out she had been born. She turned the dial. Right to 19, left past 0 to 74, right to 19, left past 0 to 90. The last number settled, and she pulled the handle, and the safe opened. Inside were 2 things. A stack of sealed envelopes, perhaps 30 of them, each one bearing the name of a different institution. Madison County Historical Society, Asheville Art Museum, University of North Carolina Cherokee Studies Program, the Museum of the Cherokee Indian. Each envelope presumably containing documentation for items to be donated according to Harlan's wishes, items he had been holding in trust for places equipped to care for them. And beside those envelopes, filling the rest of the safe's interior, were bundles of cash. Old bills, hundreds and fifties, wrapped in paper bands and stacked with the orderliness of everything else Harlan had ever touched. Nora picked up one bundle and counted. 100 bills. $10,000. She counted the bundles without lifting them. 48 on the bottom layer alone, and there were 3 layers. Beverly looked over her shoulder. Approximately $1.4 million in cash, Beverly said quietly. Untraced, preserved. It will need to be reported and taxed, but it is yours. Nora set the bundle back carefully. She stood and looked at the room as a whole. The gold along the south wall. The artifact collection on the north and east shelves. The safe on the floor with its donation envelopes and its patient stacks of cash. Outside this room, in the first chamber, 42 archival document boxes and 9 fireproof cases, and the entire inventory she had found on the first list, the coins and the art glass and the mineral rights across 4 counties. She thought about a man on a ridge above Cedar Hollow in January of 1974, buying 40 acres from a family that needed cash. She thought about every entry in every ledger, every careful acquisition, every year of living simply and building quietly, every drive past a yard in Hendersonville where a child he recognized was playing without knowing he existed. She thought about a phone ringing in a hospital and a man who said no. Ben Hartley came to stand beside Beverly. He had numbers on his clipboard. Preliminary on the bullion, he said, is $52 million for $100,000 at current spot. The Cherokee silver, based on comparable auction records, is approximately $4 million. The land grants I cannot fully value without a specialist in historical documents, but there is material here that has not appeared at auction in 40 years. The Appalachian craft work, conservatively, $3 to $5 million. The historical correspondence, $2 to $3 million. The Civil War material, $1.8 million. He looked at Carolyn. Add that to your first-room figures, Carolyn said, and we are looking at a total estate value somewhere between $350 and $450 million. The mineral rights are the wild card. If the methane extraction values I looked up yesterday are accurate, it could push past 420. Nora sat down on the stone floor of the second room, not because she chose to, but because her legs made the decision without consulting her. Lily was beside her immediately, crouching down, one hand on her mother's arm. Mom, I am all right. Nora's voice came out steadier than she felt. Just give me a minute. She sat on the cold stone floor of the room her grandfather had built for her and looked at the gold bars stacked along the wall and thought about 11 days in a Honda Odyssey and a rolled towel in a window gap and $214 in a checking account and a serious-faced 10-year-old who had never once cried about any of it. The minute passed. She got up. All right, she said. Let us keep going. They were still working through the second room when the sound of a vehicle reached them through the cabin walls. Not Beverly's sedan. Something heavier, moving up the track without hesitation. Nora was up the stairs and through the workroom and at the front window before Beverly reached the bottom step. Through the narrow gap in the shutter, she could see the clearing. A black Land Rover had parked at the clearing's edge, driver's door already open. The man who got out was in his mid-60s, broad-shouldered and red-faced, in a canvas field coat and boots that had someone else's mud on them. He walked toward the cabin with the stride of someone who has made a habit of entering places before being invited and has not yet suffered for it. Behind him, another man climbed out of the passenger side. Younger, in a suit that was wrong for the mud and the cold, carrying a briefcase. Beverly appeared at Nora's shoulder and looked through the shutter. That is Fitch, she said. The other one is his attorney, Marcus Lamb. I have had dealings with Lamb before. He is aggressive and not particularly careful with the distinction between what is legal and what is useful. What do we do? Beverly was already turning toward the door. You go back downstairs and stay with Carolyn and Ben and finish what you started. Let me handle this. Nora looked at her. I mean it, Beverly said. Harlan's letter told you the same thing I am telling you now. You have too much invested in the outcome to handle this well. I do not. That is why you need me. Nora went back downstairs. She could hear the conversation above, muffled by stone and floorboards, the way you hear weather in a building, a pressure without clear words. Fitch's voice was loud, even through the floor, the kind of loud that is not about volume but about assumption, the voice of a man who expects to be heard and gets impatient when the world arranges itself otherwise. Beverly's voice was quieter and she could not make out words, only tone, which was even and unhurried. The particular tone of someone who is not impressed. Lily was beside her again, notebook in hand, looking up at the ceiling. Carolyn did not stop working. Ben did not stop working. The inventory continued, item by item, the record accumulating in photographs and handwritten logs while above them a man tried to claim something that did not belong to him. After about 20 minutes, the Land Rover left. Beverly came back downstairs with a look on her face like someone who has eaten something unpleasant and would prefer not to discuss it at length. He served papers, Beverly said. The motion for estate freeze was filed this morning, and he brought a copy himself, personally, which tells you something about what kind of man he is. She set the documents on the nearest shelf without looking at them. I have already called the court clerk. Our inventory filing takes precedence because the deed transfer was already recorded. The freeze motion will not survive the hearing. But Nora looked at her. He said something on his way out that I think you should know. He said he knows about your situation, that you were living in your vehicle with your daughter. He intends to argue in court that the county would take a dim view of a woman with no fixed address and no verifiable income being granted control of an estate of this size. He is going to claim you are not competent to administer the inheritance. The word homeless sat in the air between them. Lily had stopped writing. She was standing very still with her notebook against her chest, the way she stood when something landed on her that she needed a moment to absorb. Can he do that? Nora asked. It is a procedural argument with no legal foundation, and I will have it dismissed before the week is out. But he will make it publicly, in a county courthouse, and before I do, it will become part of the public record, and the local press may well report it. I want you to be prepared for that. Nora thought about the van on Brevard Road, about Glenn at the laundromat handing her the mail without comment, about the rolled towel in the window gap, about the particular, specific weight of having those facts be the first things a courthouse heard about her. She looked at her daughter. Lily's face was the face she made when something hurt, but she was not going to show it, the careful, settled expression she had been wearing for months. Nora turned back to Beverly. "Let him make it," she said. "Every word of it is true, and none of it changes what is in this room. Let him say it, and let you answer it, and let the court see which argument holds water." Beverly nodded once. "Good." She picked up her notepad. "Now let us finish the inventory." They worked through the afternoon. At 3 o'clock, needing an hour away from the numbers and the stone walls, Nora drove the Odyssey down the mountain into Cedar Hollow proper to get food and 2 more kerosene bottles from the small general store at the crossroads. Cedar Hollow was not much of a place. A store, a small post office that shared a building with the fire department, a church with a hand-lettered sign, a scattering of houses along the road. The kind of community that people outside of it do not think about, and that people inside of it know completely. The woman behind the counter of the store was perhaps 70, with white hair and reading glasses on a cord around her neck. She watched Nora come in and set her things. On the counter without expression, the particular watchfulness of someone who has run the only store in a small community for a long time and has learned to read strangers quickly. "You are up at the Calloway place," she said. It was not a question. Word traveled at the same speed here as everywhere else. "Yes," Nora said. "He was a quiet man," the woman said. "Came in here for 40 years and never said more than what he needed." She seemed to be deciding something. "But he was decent. Paid what he owed. Never complained. Never caused trouble for anyone." She paused, working the kerosene bottle into a bag. "Some folks around here thought he was strange, all that time alone up in those woods. Thought maybe there was something wrong with him. But I always figured a person can have reasons for being the way they are without those reasons being anybody else's business." "Did you know him well?" The woman shook her head. "Nobody knew him well. That was the point of him." She looked at Nora directly for the first time. "You his family?" "His granddaughter." "I did not know him." The woman held her gaze for a moment. "He talked about a granddaughter once. Maybe 15 years ago. Just once, and only to me, and I never repeated it because it was not mine to repeat. He said he had made mistakes that a person could not undo, but that there was someone who would come eventually, and that he was trying to get things ready." She pulled the bag across the counter. "I did not think much of it at the time. People say things." Nora paid and picked up the bag. "But here you are," the woman said. "Yes," Nora said. "Here I am." She drove back up the mountain with the kerosene and a paper bag of food and the particular feeling of a story that has more witnesses than you knew about, more people who had been watching from the edges and keeping quiet because it was not their place to speak. Beverly and Carolyn met her at the door. "The full inventory is complete," Beverly said. "We have everything we need for the filing." She held up a printed document, pages thick. "And we have the final preliminary numbers from Ben." Nora set the food on the table and waited. "The bullion verification is done," Carolyn said. "Purity is consistent across all 243 bars, standard commercial grade. Acquisition documented to 1978. Ben's confirmed figure for the gold alone is $53.2 million. She paused. "And we heard back from the mineral rights specialist this afternoon." Nora sat down. "The methane extraction rights across the 4-county area have been generating royalties since 2011, Carolyn continued. "They were held in escrow because there was no active owner of record to claim them. Those royalties are now your property as well. Accumulated over 13 years at current rates, they come to approximately $18 million. Lily was at the table with her notebook, her tally column running 3 pages now. "So the total," Carolyn said, "including the mineral rights, the royalties, the bullion, the artifact collections, the documented financial instruments, the cash in the safe, and the real property itself, is $427 million. We are rounding down to 410 in public filings because some items require individual specialist appraisal before final valuation, but the number is not going down from here. $427 million. Lily looked up from her notebook. "I have 412, she said. "I think I missed something." "The mineral royalties," Carolyn said, very gently. They came in today. Lily nodded and added the figure to her column with the same concentrated care she had brought to every other number. Nora watched her daughter write it down. The courthouse hearing was 2 days later. Nora and Beverly drove down the mountain together in Beverly's sedan through a morning that was cold and gray, the ridgelines going in and out of low cloud. Beverly was quiet on the way down, which Nora appreciated. There was nothing more to say about the facts of the case. Beverly had the inventory, the authenticated will, the forged document analysis she had commissioned from a forensic specialist overnight, and 40 years of practicing law in Madison County. She did not need to talk about any of it. She just needed to get to the room. The courthouse in Marshall was a brick building on the town square, and the hearing room was on the second floor, small and fluorescent lit, with wooden benches that smelled of old varnish. Gerald Fitch was already there when they arrived, seated at the respondent's table with Marcus Lamb beside him and 2 other men whose presence seemed to be more about physical weight than legal expertise. Fitch looked at Nora when she came in. She recognized the look because she had been receiving versions of it all her adult life from people who took one survey of her and decided she was something manageable. He had made the same decision about Harlan once, Beverly had told her. He had been wrong about that too. The judge was a woman in her late 50s named Clara Whitfield, with a manner that reminded Nora of Beverly, efficient and unhurried, someone who had long since stopped being interested in performance and wanted only facts. Beverly presented the estate transfer documents, the inventory, the will, and the authentication reports in a sequence so orderly and well-constructed that the hearing felt less like an argument and more like a demonstration of what a properly organized case looks like. She did not raise her voice. She did not editorialize. She placed each document before the court and let it speak for itself. Marcus Lamb presented Fitch's claim, the alleged verbal agreement from 1988. The investment capital supposedly provided, the promised share of assets. The documentation for all of this consisted of a handwritten note on paper that Beverly's forensic contact had, at considerable speed, dated to approximately the last 3 years. Rather than 1988, Judge Whitfield looked at the document for a long moment without speaking. She turned it over. She looked at it again. Then she looked at Lamb. "You are presenting a document you claim was signed in 1988, she said, on paper that was manufactured after 2022. Lamb began to speak, and she held up one hand. "The freeze motion is denied." She set the document down. "I am also referring this matter to the State Bar and to the County Prosecutor's Office. You may want to consult your own attorney, Mr. Lamb." Fitch stood up. The sound he made was not quite words. The judge looked at him with the calm patience of someone who has watched angry men run out of steam in her courtroom many times before and knows exactly how long it takes. "Mr. Fitch, sit down, or I will have you removed." He sat down. The 2 men behind him looked at the floor. After the hearing, on the courthouse steps in the cold, Beverly allowed herself what appeared to be the closest thing to satisfaction that her face could produce. "That particular motion will not be resubmitted," she said. "Not by Lamb. Fitch will need to find someone else willing to represent him in anything related to this estate, which will take time and will not be cheap." She looked at Nora. "It is not over entirely. He will try something else. But the estate is not frozen and the inventory is on record, and we are in a considerably stronger position than we were this morning." They stood there for a moment on the steps. A few people had watched the hearing from the public benches, town regulars and a young woman with a notebook who was almost certainly a local reporter. Nora had felt their attention in the room and had sat with it without looking back, the same way she had learned to sit with the particular attention people gave a woman who had clearly been sleeping rough, the kind of attention that is assessment dressed up as concern. On the way out, she had passed close enough to hear 2 of the bench-sitters talking in the low voices people use when they want to be overheard. One of them was saying that this was the part he did not understand, because how does a woman who was living in her car make a credible case for handling $400 million? The other one had laughed. She had kept walking. "He said it," Nora said. "About the van." "Yes." Lamb introduced it in his opening remarks. Beverly's voice was neutral. "I addressed it in 2 sentences. The judge did not ask a follow-up question. It will be in the record, but it will not be the story." Nora looked at the town square, at the bare trees and the low sky. "When you are poor," she said, "people treat it like a character judgment. Like it tells them something about who you are that they need to know before they decide how to talk to you. Beverly was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Harlan was not wealthy for the first 30 years of his life. He was a coal miner's son from a county that nobody looked at twice. He understood that. Is that why he never spent any of it? Beverly considered that. I think he spent it on things that could not be taken. Land, gold, objects that had survived 100 years already and would survive 100 more. He did not trust anything that required other people to recognize its value. Only things that held their value regardless of who was looking. They drove back up the mountain. On the way, Nora's phone rang from a number she did not recognize. She let it go to voicemail and listened to the message when Beverly pulled up to the cabin. The voice was male, careful, with the particular flatness of someone who has prepared what he is going to say. Nora, this is Eric. Eric Purvis. You may not want to hear from me, and I understand that. I heard through some people we both know that you came into some kind of inheritance. I just wanted to reach out, in case, well, in case there was anything I could do, or anything we needed to talk about. Give me a call when you get a chance. Eric Purvis was her ex-husband. He had left 15 months ago, taken most of the joint savings, and moved to Charlotte with a woman he had been seeing for 7 months before Nora found out. He had negotiated the divorce settlement through a lawyer who sent forms by email and had not been in the same room as Nora since the day he took the television and the truck. He had not called once in 15 months to ask how Lily was doing. His mother had run into Dana at a grocery store in Fletcher shortly after the eviction and told her, apparently without any trace of shame, that she had always thought Nora was not very practical and that it was no surprise things had come apart the way they did. Dana had sent Nora a text relaying this. Nora had read it in the van on Brevard Road and sat with it for a while in the dark before deleting it. She deleted the voicemail now and put the phone in her pocket. Lily was watching her from the porch. Who was it? No one, Nora said. She meant it in every sense that mattered. She thought, briefly, about what Eric would have said 15 days ago if she had called him from the laundromat parking lot and told him that his daughter was sleeping in the back of a van with a $4 sleeping bag and a rolled towel in the window gap. She thought about what his mother would have said. She thought about how they would have used those facts, how they already had been using them in the retelling of why Nora had ended up where she had ended up, as though the van were a verdict rather than a circumstance, as though circumstance and character were the same thing in the eyes of people who had never faced a circumstance they could not buy their way out of. She went up the porch steps. Lily moved aside without a word. Neither of them said anything else about the call. Carolyn was waiting inside with the updated filing. Beverly reviewed it at the table while Nora built up the fire and Lily set out the food Nora had brought up from Cedar Hollow. The cabin had taken on a different quality over the last 2 days, less like a frozen space and more like a lived-in one. The fire going, jackets hung on the pegs by the door, Lily's field guide and notebook spread on the table alongside Beverly's legal documents. Something about that combination felt exactly right to Nora, though she could not have said precisely why. The first donation envelope was addressed to the Museum of the Cherokee Indian up in Cherokee, and inside it, Harlan had documented 4 silver pieces, a gorget and 3 bracelets, acquired from a private estate sale in 1983 with full provenance tracing the pieces to a dealer who had purchased them legally from an authenticated collection in 1941. His letter to the museum was 3 pages long and included his appraisal records, his authentication documentation, and a request that the pieces be displayed with their full acquisition history rather than simply their age. He had not been a sentimental man, Nora thought, but he had been a careful one. And somewhere in that carefulness, over 50 years of early mornings and quiet work and decisions nobody else saw, he had done something that looked a great deal like love, even if he would never have called it that. The night before the hearing, Nora's phone rang again. This time it was Dana. Dana, whose apartment address Nora had used for mail until the landlord objected. Dana, who had sent the text about Eric's mother's comment and probably spent an hour deciding whether to send it. Dana, who had known Nora for 11 years and had not once called in the 2 months since the eviction to ask where she and Lily were sleeping. Nora, Dana said, her voice carrying the particular flatness of someone who has prepared their tone in advance. I heard something today. I heard you came into some money. Word had traveled 45 miles down a mountain in under 48 hours. Yes, Nora said carefully. A lot of money, Dana said. Someone told me a lot. It is complicated still. I cannot discuss the details. Right. Dana was quiet for a moment. I just wanted to say, and I hope this comes out right, I am sorry about the mail situation. About asking you not to use the address anymore. Nora said nothing. I just could not afford to lose the apartment. My landlord is very difficult, and I thought maybe you had somewhere else you could go. Dana paused. I should have asked you directly how bad it was instead of assuming. This was as close to an apology as Dana was capable of. Nora recognized it for what it was and recognized also that it had arrived after the news did, not before, which was its own kind of information. It is all right, Nora said. Can I do anything? Dana asked, and the question had a slightly different quality than it would have carried 2 days ago, before the word money had entered the conversation from the direction it had. Not right now, but I will let you know. She hung up and sat with the phone in her hand. Lily was watching her from across the table. Who was that? An old friend, Nora said, remembering to be one. Lily looked at her with a 10-year-old's clear and unsentimental understanding. She only called because she heard. Yes. Is that going to happen a lot? Nora thought about the courthouse tomorrow. She thought about Beverly's warning that the court filing would be public by end of week and that reporters read court filings. She thought about Eric's voicemail and Dana's timing and the 2 men on the bench in the courthouse who had said that part they could not understand. Probably, she said, but it does not change anything that happened in that room below us. People can know about it or not know about it, and it is still the same thing either way. Lily accepted this and returned to her field guide with the focused calm that was her particular way of saying she had heard something important and was going to sit with it for a while before she decided what she thought. The court filing is complete and will be public record as of tomorrow morning. That means the amount will become known. Not from us, not from the inventory documents, but Fitch knows the approximate scale, and Lamb will talk and reporters read court filings. By the end of the week, this will be a story. Nora thought about the woman in the Cedar Hollow store who had said, "Here you are," with the particular tone of someone who had been waiting without knowing it. She thought about the chickadee outside the window that morning, the most ordinary sound in the world, indifferent to everything below it. Let it be a story, she said. We will still be here. That night, after Beverly and Carolyn had driven back down the mountain, after Lily had fallen asleep in the sleeping room upstairs for the first time, because there was now a blanket up there, and it felt like a real place to sleep, Nora sat at the table with a piece of paper and wrote 2 words at the top. Calloway Foundation. And below that, Cedar Hollow. She thought about the donation envelopes in the safe, addressed to museums and programs and institutions that Harlan had decided were better custodians of certain things than he was. She thought about the mineral rights running across 4 counties, generating royalties for 13 years in an account that no one had been claiming because there was no one to claim them, money accumulating in an escrow account somewhere as quiet and patient as everything else Harlan had ever built. She thought about the first ledger entry, January 3rd, 1974. I do not want to build for no one. He had built for her. But she was starting to understand that she was not the end of the story. She was the point at which one story ended and another one started, the hinge between a man who had spent 50 years accumulating in secret and whatever came next, which would have to be something else entirely, something that moved outward instead of downward, that trusted people instead of stone walls. She thought about what Fitch's lawyer had said in the courthouse, about a woman with no fixed address and no verifiable income. She thought about the 2 men on the public bench who had said that part they could not understand. She had heard variations of that argument her entire adult life, not always in courthouses, not always out loud, but always carrying the same meaning, which was that the condition of having very little was evidence of a permanent incapacity rather than a temporary position, that someone who had been poor was not the same kind of person as someone who had never been poor and could not be trusted with the same things. She had sat with that argument in the courthouse the way she had sat with Eric's voicemail and Dana's belated apology and the woman in the Cedar Hollow store who had said, "Here you are," as though she had always known this moment would come. She had sat with all of it without letting it become a wall, because she had seen what walls looked like when you built them around yourself for 50 years. She knew exactly what they looked like from both sides. She pulled the paper toward her and began to write. The list grew from 2 words to 3 pages. Housing assistance for families facing the same displacement she had faced, because that particular experience concentrated the mind on what was useful and what was not. Scholarship support for students from Madison County and the surrounding 4 counties where Harlan's mineral rights ran, because this was the specific ground that had generated the wealth and the specific ground that had been depleted by the industries that came before. Medical assistance for families who were making decisions between medication and rent, because Ruby Carter had made those decisions and Maya had made those decisions and Nora had made those decisions, and there was no reason anyone should have to. She thought about the woman in the store who had said he talked about a granddaughter once, 15 years ago. Just once, and only to me, and I never repeated it because it was not mine to repeat. He said he had made mistakes that a person could not undo, but that there was someone who would come eventually, and that he was trying to get things ready. She wrote that down too. Not as a program or an initiative. Just as a fact she wanted to keep somewhere outside her own head, where it would not get crowded out by numbers and filings and the various attempts of people like Fitch to rewrite what was true. She wrote until the fire needed another log, and she got up to add one and stood there for a moment looking at the carved name on the door, visible from the inside too if you knew where to look, just the edge of the letters where the door sat in its frame. She had been 3 years old the last time she was in this room, held on the hip of a man she was only now beginning to know. She had been laughing at something off camera. She did not know what. Maybe nothing in particular. Maybe just the ordinary business of being 3 years old and being held and not knowing yet that the world would ask a great deal of her before it was done. Outside, the mountains were dark and the hemlocks stood without moving in the cold, still air. Somewhere down the mountain, Gerald Fitch was working on whatever came next. Somewhere 45 miles south, Eric Purvis was waiting for a call back that was not coming. Somewhere in Knoxville, her father was buried in a cemetery she had never visited. She thought she would go there someday, not for closure, because she did not believe in closure the way it was usually described, but because it seemed like the kind of thing you did when you finally had time and the right amount of quiet to do it. She went back to the table and kept writing. The 3 pages became 4. The fire held. The cabin was warm around her, and the carved name was just out of sight in the dark, and her daughter was sleeping above her head, and in the room below the floor the gold bars sat on their shelves, patient and permanent, exactly where a careful and lonely and ultimately hopeful man had left them. She wrote until the night was very late, and then she folded the pages and put them in her coat pocket and went to sleep. Tomorrow the news would reach the valley. By the end of the week, it would go further than that. The people who had said she was not the kind of person who could handle this would read about her in a newspaper. Fitch would try something else. Eric would call again. More people from the edges of her old life would remember her name and find reasons to use it. All of that was coming. She knew that clearly. What she also knew, what she felt in the particular way that facts feel when they have finally been absorbed all the way through, was that none of it changed what was in the room below her. None of it changed what Harlan had spent 50 years building, or what he had asked her to do with it, or what she had already decided she would. The mountains held their dark outside the shuttered windows. Inside, Nora Calloway slept beside the dying fire, the 3 pages in her coat pocket, the foundation with 2 words at the top, the next part of the story still ahead of her, not begun yet, but already clear enough to write toward. The story broke on Thursday morning. Nora was at the workbench when Beverly called, the early light just finding the clearing outside, the hemlocks casting their long shadows across the frost. She had been sorting through Harlan's tool collection, not inventorying, just handling them, learning the weight and purpose of each one, running her thumb along the edge of a spoke shave that was still sharp after probably 40 years on its peg. Beverly's voice was careful. The Madison County Record ran a piece this morning, she said. Online already and in print this afternoon. It quotes from the probate filing and estimates the estate value at $400 million. There is a photograph of the cabin. Where did they get the photograph? That is a good question. Somebody was out there with a camera, probably, when we were at the courthouse. The piece does not name the photographer. Beverly paused. There is also a line about your previous living situation. It is the second paragraph. Nora read the article on her phone with Lily leaning in beside her. The headline was, Cedar Hollow heir to $400 million Harlan Calloway fortune identified. The second paragraph described her as a former Fletcher resident who had been living in her vehicle with her 10-year-old daughter at the time the inheritance was discovered. It was accurate. Every word of it was accurate. She had been parked behind Glenn's laundromat, and the letter had come on a Tuesday, and none of that had changed just because the numbers were now in a newspaper. What she noticed, reading it, was that the article also described Harlan. It used Beverly's interview notes, apparently, or the probate documentation, to sketch out the shape of his life. A single man who had lived alone for 50 years in a remote cabin in Madison County. Never married, no children of record, described by neighbors as quiet and private. Built a substantial fortune through what estate documents described as 5 decades of disciplined saving and investing. Left it in its entirety to a granddaughter he had never spoken to. That was the paragraph already being shared. Not the 400 million. Not the gold bars. The paragraph about the granddaughter he had never spoken to. Nora put the phone down and looked at the fire. Lily was holding her field guide open without reading it, the way she did when she was thinking about something else. People are going to come, Lily said. Yes. Not just the bad kind. The kind who want to write about it. Yes. Lily turned a page she had not read. What do we tell them? The truth, Nora said. But on our timeline. Not theirs. The requests began that afternoon. Beverly fielded them, which was her job, which she did with the same efficient evenness she brought to everything else. A reporter from the Asheville paper. A television producer from Charlotte. A local radio station in Marshall. Beverly told them all the same thing. Ms. Calloway is not available for comment at this time and will communicate through her attorney when ready. What Nora was doing instead of speaking to reporters was walking the 11 acres. She had not done it before. She had been inside the cabin or underground in the vault or down the mountain at courthouses and offices, and she had not simply walked the land that was hers now. She did it that afternoon with Lily beside her, both of them in heavy coats, moving through the dry November brush along the ridge line and down toward the creek that ran at the property's western edge. The land was not dramatic. No striking views, no exceptional features. It was Appalachian ridge land, second-growth forest, and stone outcroppings and the remnants of old agricultural effort going slowly back to wild. But it was solid under her feet. It was 11 acres that no one could come and ask her to leave. They found where Harlan had kept his garden. A cleared flat area on the south slope, still showing the straight edge lines of old beds. The soil there was dark and well-amended, better than the surrounding ground. He had been working that patch for decades, building up the clay soil every year, and what he had left was land that would grow things well. Lily crouched down and picked up a handful. Good dirt, she said. Yes, Nora agreed. We could grow things here. Yes. They stood in the old garden in the cold and looked at it for a while, without saying anything else. They did not need to. Eric Purvis arrived on Saturday. He drove up in a rental car because he did not know about the logging road Beverly had been using, so he came up the main track, and Nora saw the car from the window and knew before she saw his face that it was him. He had a man with him, younger, carrying a briefcase in the same wrong-for-mud way that Marcus Lamb had carried his the week before. Eric himself looked like he had driven through the night, which he probably had, which told Nora how fast he had done the math after reading the article. She opened the door before he could knock. He stopped on the porch steps when he saw her face. He had expected something else, she thought. Maybe gratitude, maybe guilt, maybe some version of the woman he had left who had been worn down enough to be manageable. He had not factored in 3 weeks in a cabin with her daughter and $400 million in clear legal ownership and Beverly Caldwell on retainer. Nora, he said. Eric, she said. I tried to call. I know. He looked at the cabin behind her. The carved name on the door. The workbench visible through the open doorway. I just thought, he said, given what you have found, given the circumstances, there might be things worth discussing. His lawyer was watching from 2 steps behind with the focused attention of someone doing a calculation. Beverly appeared at Nora's shoulder. She had driven up that morning specifically because Nora had called and told her Eric was coming, and because Beverly had been doing this work long enough to know that the moment an inheritance of this size became public news, former spouses appeared at doors within the week. Mr. Purvis, Beverly said, I am Ms. Calloway's attorney. The estate of Harlan James Calloway was a privately held inheritance predating your marriage to my client by several decades. It was identified, documented, and legally transferred following your divorce, which was finalized 14 months ago. It does not constitute a marital asset under North Carolina law. There is no legal basis for any claim on your part, and any attempt to file one will be dismissed at the first hearing. She said all of it in the same unhurried tone she used for everything, the tone of someone presenting facts rather than arguments, and it had the same effect it always had, which was to leave very little room for a response that was not either agreement or embarrassment. Eric's lawyer opened his briefcase and then closed it again. Eric looked at Nora. He was trying to find something in her face, some opening, some remnant of the dynamic that had operated between them for 7 years. She watched him look, and she held still and let him finish. "There is nothing here for you," she said. "There was not before this either. I just want to be clear about it, so there is no confusion going forward." He stood on the porch steps for another moment. Then he went down to his rental car and drove back down the mountain without another word. Lily came out of the workroom where she had been standing in the doorway, visible to Nora but not to Eric. "Is he gone?" "Yes." "Is he going to try again?" Beverly answered before Nora could. "He will consult another attorney, who will tell him what I just told him, and that will be the end of it." Lily nodded and went back inside to her field guide. Beverly waited until the sound of the rental car had faded down the track. Then she looked at Nora. "There will be others," she said, "not with legal standing, but with expectations. People from your past who decide that what you have now makes them closer to you than they were before." "I know. What do you want to do about them?" Nora thought about it. "I want to be fair, and I want to be firm, and I want to spend the majority of my time on the people who need what we are building rather than the people who want what we have." Beverly looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "I think Harlan would have respected that very much." The first formal foundation meeting happened in the cabin on the second week of December, 3 weeks after Nora had first driven up the logging track and found the carved name on the door. Beverly was there with a corporate formation attorney from Asheville. Carolyn was there. Ben Hartley was there as a consultant. And Dr. Ruth Standing Deer was there, a cultural preservation specialist from the University of North Carolina who had been contacted about the Cherokee Silver collection and had driven up from Chapel Hill with barely any notice, arriving with 2 graduate students and a care for the material that made Nora feel, for the first time, that the donation envelopes in the safe had been the most important thing Harlan had ever put there. Dr. Standing Deer had spent 2 hours in the second room with the Cherokee Silver and come back up the stairs with wet eyes and a quiet composure that was its own kind of authority. She sat across the table from Nora and said, "Do you know what these pieces represent?" Nora shook her head. "These are pre-removal work," Dr. Standing Deer said, "made before 1838. There are 14 known examples of pre-removal Cherokee silver at this level of craftsmanship in institutional collections in North America. Your grandfather held 4 of them." She paused. "He acquired them legally, through documented estate sales, which means the provenance is clean and the return to a Cherokee institution is straightforward. But the fact that he preserved them correctly, documented everything, and specifically designated them for return." She looked at Nora. "That was not accidental. He knew what they were. He knew what a lot of things were," Nora said. Dr. Standing Deer nodded. "The Museum of the Cherokee Indian has been contacted, and they are prepared to receive them within the month. There will be a ceremony. I would like to extend an invitation to you and your daughter, if you are willing to come." "We would," Nora said. The corporate formation took 2 days. The Calloway Foundation was incorporated as a nonprofit with Beverly as initial board secretary and Nora as executive director, a title that felt strange to type and stranger to say aloud, but which Beverly said was the correct designation for the person who was going to make the decisions. Nora brought her 3 pages from the night by the fire, which had grown to 11 since then, and Beverly and the formation attorney helped shape them into program areas. Housing assistance for families facing eviction, administered through partnerships with existing county social services. Medical assistance for uninsured and underinsured residents across all 4 counties where Harlan's mineral rights ran. Educational support for students in those same counties, scholarships and supplies, and the particular kind of aid that fell between formal categories: the Chromebook a student needed, the driver's education class, the test prep materials that everyone assumed were affordable and that were not. Nora also spread the donation envelopes from the safe across the table. Museum of the Cherokee Indian, for pieces of pre-removal silver. Madison County Historical Society, 11 original land grants from 1803 to 1867. Asheville Art Museum, 3 pieces of pre-Civil War American folk art. The UNC Cherokee Studies Program, 112 pieces of 19th century correspondence. Western Carolina University, a set of survey maps from the 1850s. Each envelope held Harlan's careful documentation. Each donation was essentially ready to execute. He had spent the last years of his life not just preserving these things, but preparing their return, making sure that whoever followed him would not need to figure out where they belonged. He had already figured it out. All that was required now was the delivery. The Historical Society director came to the cabin on a Thursday with 2 colleagues and spent 6 hours going through Harlan's documentation with a concentration that reminded Nora of Ben Hartley, the same stillness of an expert in the presence of material they had not expected to see. When they left, the director stopped on the porch. "I want you to know something," she said. She was in her late 60s, precise-spoken. Harlan Calloway was known to us. Not personally, but he called the office twice over the years to ask questions about preservation techniques for historical paper documents. He never identified himself. We had no idea who he was or what he held. She looked at the carved name on the doorframe. He was protecting things that belonged to this county's history for 50 years. And now they are coming back. She paused. "I wanted to say that out loud to someone." Nora nodded. "He did not do it perfectly," she said. "He did it alone, and he was afraid the whole time, and he missed the chance to do it with people around him. But he did it." The director looked at her for a moment. "Yes," she said. "He did." The news story had not gone away. The Madison County piece had been picked up by the Asheville paper and then by a wire service, and by the second week of December it was appearing in national newspapers and morning television segments. The angle that traveled was always the same. Homeless mother and daughter inherit $400 million from a grandfather she had never met. There were photographs of the cabin taken from the clearing's edge. There was a photograph of the carved name on the door, which someone had gotten close enough to frame properly. Nora did not read the comment sections. This was Beverly's advice and also her own instinct, and they agreed on it completely. What she did read was a letter that arrived through Beverly's office, forwarded from the probate filing address. It was handwritten on plain paper, and it said, "Ms. Calloway, my name is Thomas Calloway. I am the son of your grandfather's younger brother William, who died in 1999. I want to make clear that I have no legal claim on the estate, and I am not contacting you for financial reasons. I am writing because I saw the article and I recognized the cabin. I was there once, when I was 9 years old. My father brought me to meet Harlan, who was his brother, though they were not close. I remember a man who was very quiet and who showed me how to plane a piece of wood on that workbench. I did not know him beyond that one visit, but I wanted to tell someone that he was real to me, even if he was not real to many people, and that I am glad someone found what he left." Nora wrote back that same day. She told Thomas Calloway that she would like to meet him when she was ready, that she was still learning who Harlan had been, and that speaking to someone who had actually sat at that workbench with him would matter to her. She told him that the workbench was still there and the plane he remembered was still hanging on its peg. She did not hear back for 2 weeks. When she did, his reply was one line: "I would like that very much." The foundation made its first public announcement on January 8th at a small event at the Madison County Public Library in Marshall. Beverly had suggested the courthouse square, but Nora had chosen the library because the library was where she had gone on the first day after the letter arrived, to use the computer and look up Cedar Hollow and find nothing, and because libraries had always stayed open to her regardless of her address. The room held about 60 people: local officials, county social service staff, school representatives, a few reporters, and a larger number of ordinary residents who had seen the announcement in the paper and come without knowing exactly why. The way people come to things when what is being announced feels close to their own life in some way they cannot entirely name. Nora had prepared what she wanted to say. She had written it at the cabin table over 3 nights, reading it back to Lily, who said once, "That part is right," and once, "That part sounds like you were trying to sound like someone else," which was the most useful feedback she received. She stood at the library podium and spoke. "My grandfather spent 50 years saving everything he could for someone he had never met. He did it because he had hurt people he loved, and he did not know any other way to say so. He built a room underground on a mountain in Madison County, and he filled it with things that would hold their value, and he kept going even when he could not have known if anyone would ever come." She paused. "I came. My daughter came. And what we found was not just a fortune. It was evidence that a person can keep trying to do right even after they have run out of time for the direct version of it." She told them what the foundation would do. The Housing Assistance Program, administered through the county DSS office, covering 3 months of rent or mortgage payments for families in active danger of eviction, with no application more complex than a single page. The Medical Assistance Fund, working through the county health department to cover costs that insurance gaps left behind. Prescription drugs, dental care, mental health services, the specific categories where people fell through the cracks between what was technically covered and what was actually affordable. The Education Fund, awarding need-based grants to students at 6 county schools, asking only that recipients write one letter at the end of each funded year describing what they had done with the support. She described the Cherokee Silver donation and what Dr. Standing Deer had said about the pieces. She described the Historical Society transfers. She did not talk about Fitch. She did not talk about Eric. She did not talk about the 2 men in the courthouse who had said that part they could not understand, the part about a woman with no fixed address being granted control of a fortune of this size. She did not need to. The room understood without being told the shape of what she was not saying. When she finished, a woman in the second row, maybe 40 years old, with the expression of someone who has been holding something carefully for a long time and has just been given permission to put it down, raised her hand. The housing program, she said. My family is 60 days behind. Since September, I have been too ashamed to go to DSS. Nora looked at her directly. There is nothing to be ashamed of, Nora said. The program is open. Come to Beverly Caldwell's office in Waynesville this week, and we will get you started. The woman put her hand down and nodded. The room went quiet for a moment in the way rooms go quiet when something real has just happened in them. And then a man in the back row, older, in a work coat with a county parks logo on the chest, said quietly, My son has been trying to get into community college. He keeps stopping because of the cost. And someone else, a young woman near the window, said, My mother has been rationing her blood pressure medication for 8 months because we cannot cover the full prescription. Each one said it in the same low tone, the tone of someone who has been carrying something they expected to carry alone indefinitely and has just found out they might not have to. Nora listened to each one and wrote each name down in the notebook she had brought for exactly this purpose. We will follow up with every person here by the end of the week, Beverly said from the side of the room. She had her own notebook out. No application will take more than a single page. We are not in the business of making it complicated for people to ask for what they need. That was the first recipient. There were 11 more in the first week, and by the end of January the housing queue had 23 families in it. The Medical Assistance Fund had approved its first 12 claims, and Daniel Reeves from outside Marshall had received his scholarship letter and written back the same day with 3 sentences that Nora read twice and then folded into the notebook she kept at the workbench. I did not think anyone outside my family knew I was trying. Thank you for knowing. I will not waste it. The cabin became home in the gradual and specific way that places become home, not through a single decision, but through accumulation. Lily's field guides on the shelf beside Harlan's almanacs. Nora's coat on the peg beside the woodworking tools. A third chair added to the table for when Beverly needed one. A generator installed in a shed at the clearing's edge so they had electric light in the evenings without burning kerosene for every hour. The hand pump in the kitchen cleaned and tuned and proven capable of drawing clean cold water from the well below. The road was improved in February, gravel laid on the worst sections so it was passable after rain without four-wheel drive. Not for drama. Because Lily needed to get to school without the Odyssey scraping on the Ford crossing. Lily enrolled at the Madison County School in January with a fixed address on her form for the first time in 4 months. Her teacher sent Nora an email in the 3rd week saying that Lily was very quiet but seemed to be paying attention to everything, which was exactly right, and that she had started a nature journal using the scientific names from her field guides, which her classmates found impressive. Nora read the email at the workbench, which had become her desk, and looked at the tools hanging on their pegs above her. She thought about the man who had hung them there. The man who had planed wood in this room for 40 years in the cold and the quiet, and driven past a yard in Hendersonville once a year to confirm that a child he had failed was still alive, and then driven home and kept building. She did not forgive him, exactly. Forgiveness was not the right word for something this complicated. But she understood him. She understood what fear does to a person over a long time. How it becomes the shape of everything you build. How you can spend a whole life constructing something real and true and necessary, and still have it be fundamentally shaped by what you were running from. She understood it because she had spent the last 2 years afraid in her own way, afraid of the eviction and the van and the food running out, afraid in ways that had started to narrow her thinking down to just the immediate problem, just the next tank of gas, just the next restaurant that had not yet called back. Fear had that specific quality, the way it shrank the horizon until you stopped being able to see anything beyond the next 24 hours. What had broken that open was not the money. It was the carved name on a door in a clearing in the Madison County mountains. It was Lily's voice saying, "Mom, someone carved our name into the door," in the same level curious tone she used for everything, not afraid, not amazed, just paying attention. Thomas Calloway came to Cedar Hollow in April. He was 63, a retired schoolteacher from Morganton, with Harlan's dark eyes and none of Harlan's remoteness. He sat at the cabin table and talked for 3 hours, and what he gave Nora was not revelation but texture, the specific texture of a real person rather than a subject being reconstructed from documents. He remembered that Harlan's hands had smelled of linseed oil. He remembered that Harlan had been impatient with noise but patient with children. He remembered the one visit, when he was 9, and the way Harlan had shown him how to read the grain of a piece of wood before you planed it, how you had to understand which direction the grain ran before you could work with it rather than against it. You learned that once, Harlan had apparently told a 9-year-old Thomas, and you never fight wood again. Thomas smiled telling it. He was like that, he said. He knew things. He just did not always know how to give them to people without the giving feeling like a lesson, whether you wanted one or not. He paused. That was the thing he never fully figured out. Nora thought about Harlan's letter, about the word afraid appearing 3 times in 4 paragraphs. He tried to figure it out at the end, she said. Thomas nodded slowly. I believe that. From what you have described, that room underground, all those years of work for someone he had never met. He looked at the workbench. That was him trying in the only language he had left. He had brought the box of photographs his father had kept. He set it on the table, and they went through it slowly, the 3 of them, Lily leaning in from her chair on the end. There were photographs of the 2 brothers together as young men, William and Harlan, one of them grinning broadly, and one of them looking at the camera with the expression of someone being photographed against his better judgment. It was obvious which was which. There were photographs of the cabin in earlier decades, the clearing wider then, before the hemlocks had grown up so thick. A photograph of the garden in summer, the beds full, a man's shadow falling across the near row, not quite in the frame. There was one photograph Nora held for a long time. It showed Harlan at what appeared to be the workbench, turned toward the camera, startled mid-task, one hand still on the plane, the other raised slightly as though he had just registered that someone was there. His expression was not the closed, careful expression she had imagined from the ledgers. It was surprised and briefly open, the face of a man who had not expected to be seen and whose habitual guard was down for exactly the second it took to take the photograph. That is the only one I have ever seen where he looks like that, Thomas said. Like what? Thomas considered. Like he might be glad someone was there. Lily looked at the photograph for a moment and then looked at Nora. He looks like you, she said. When you do not know I am watching. Nora looked at the photograph. She looked at her daughter. Then she looked at the workbench behind her, the real workbench, still there, the plane still on its peg, the cedar shavings still pale on the floor from the last time someone had worked there, which had been Harlan and which was going to be her again, she had decided, because the wood and the tools and the knowledge of how to read grain were still there and she intended to learn them. Nora visited her father's grave in Knoxville on a cold December afternoon, leaving Lily at the cabin with Beverly, who had by then become so regularly present at Cedar Hollow that she kept a coat on the peg by the door and knew where the coffee was without asking. Nora drove the 4 hours alone, which she needed, and found the cemetery without difficulty on the east side of the city, well-maintained and unremarkable. Robert James Calloway, 1956 to 2018. That was all the stone said. She stood there for a long time without speaking. She had expected to feel something specific and clear, and instead she felt several things at once that did not resolve into a single emotion, which was probably the honest response to a man she had never met who had never tried to meet her, and who had also been failed by his father, and had carried that failure for 62 years before a construction accident in Knoxville ended the carrying. She did not know what he had been like. She knew what his father had been like, in the ledger version, in the letters, in the slow accumulation of recorded choices that spelled out a character even when the person making them had not intended to be legible. Robert had left no ledgers, no documented choices, No 50-year record of anything she could find. She had contacted the construction company in Knoxville before making the drive. A foreman named Dale Hutchins, who had worked with Robert for 11 years, called her back within an hour of her message. He was the kind of man who does not warm up slowly, who either trusts you or does not within the first 2 minutes of talking, and he decided to trust her immediately. "Your daddy was the best rough carpenter I ever had on a crew," he said. Quiet man. Did not talk about his personal life, which was fine by me because plenty of guys talk too much. He was steady, showed up every day, looked after the younger guys on the crew without making a show of it. He paused. He mentioned a daughter once. Said he had not done right by her when she was small, and that it was the thing in his life he could not fix. I told him it was never too late, and he said, with respect, "Dale, some things are." She paused. He was not wrong about that, Dale said, "but I am sorry all the same." She had thanked him and hung up and sat with that for a few days before making the drive to Knoxville. Now she stood at the grave and thought about a man who had looked after younger workers without making a show of it, and who had said, with respect, "Some things are too late," and who had died in a construction accident in 2018 without knowing that his father had spent 44 years building something for the daughter he had also failed to reach. They had been doing the same thing in parallel, she thought. Father and grandfather, both of them carrying the same failure, both of them unable to find the direct route through it, both of them ending without the conversation they had needed to have. She brought flowers. She put them at the base of the stone and stood there until she felt she had stood there long enough. On the drive back, she stopped for gas outside Waynesville, and the teenager behind the counter recognized her from the news coverage. His face went through several expressions before landing on something honest. "You are the cabin woman," he said. "Yes," she said. He bagged her coffee without looking at what he was doing. "That must be wild." "It is a lot of things," she said. "Wild is one of them." She drove back up the mountain to Cedar Hollow in the last light of the afternoon, and when she pulled into the clearing, the cabin windows were lit warm from inside with the lanterns and the fire, and she could see Lily's shape moving across one window and Beverly's shape at the table. And the woodpile along the east wall stood one row lower than it had that morning because someone had been feeding the fire without thinking about it, which was exactly what wood was for. She sat in the van for a moment with the engine off, looking at it. The Museum of the Cherokee Indian. Ceremony happened on a Saturday in March. Nora and Lily drove the 2 hours south to Cherokee on a morning still cold, but beginning to show the first edges of spring, the redbuds coming in at the lower elevations, the road going pale green in the early light. The museum had installed the 4 pieces in a new case in the permanent collection, positioned at eye level with full lighting and a wall text panel describing their history and Harlan's stewardship of them. Dr. Standing Deer met them at the entrance and walked them through the installation herself. Lily stood in front of the case for a long time. The silver gorget on its mount was about 4 inches across, engraved with a design that had required considerable skill to execute, made by a silversmith in the decades before the Trail of Tears, before the forced removal that had taken most of the Cherokee Nation from these mountains in 1838. "What does the design mean?" Lily asked. Dr. Standing Deer crouched to Lily's eye level. "That is a question scholars have been working on for a long time." She described several interpretations carefully, different elements and their possible meanings, with the honest precision of a person who knows a great deal and is willing to say clearly where the knowledge ends. She talked about the symbolism of certain recurring forms in Cherokee silver work, about what was known from written records and what could only be inferred from the objects themselves, about the particular difficulty of interpreting material culture when the people who made it were forcibly removed from the place they made it in and the continuous thread of explanation was broken. Lily listened without interrupting, which was the most respectful thing she knew how to do when someone was explaining something real. Afterward, the museum director came to find Nora in the gallery. She was Cherokee herself, in her 50s, with the particular composure of someone who has spent a professional life working with objects that carry grief. "These pieces have been away for a long time," she said. She was looking at the case. "There is something that happens when something comes back. Not completion, because you cannot complete what was taken, but a kind of acknowledgement that it existed and that it matters that it is here." Nora thought about Harlan buying a gorget from an estate sale in 1979, probably for a few $100s, taking it home to Cedar Hollow in his truck, sealing it in a labeled container on a shelf in a stone room below the mountain, writing the provenance documentation by hand, and adding it to his list with an estimated current value and the name of the institution where it should eventually go. In 1979, she had not yet been born. She walked back to where Lily was still standing in front of the case and stood beside her daughter, and they looked at the silver together in the clean museum light without speaking, which was the correct way to look at something that had waited that long to be seen. The Madison County Record ran a follow-up piece in May, 6 months after the first article. The reporter was the same young woman who had been at the courthouse in November with her notebook, careful and thorough then and careful and thorough now. She had interviewed 14 families who had received housing assistance. She had spoken to 3 students in their second semester on foundation scholarships. She had visited the museum in Cherokee and photographed the silver pieces in their case. The headline was, "Cedar Hollow Foundation Changes Lives Across 4 Counties." Nora read it at the workbench on a Tuesday morning with the window open to the spring air coming off the ridge. The second paragraph described the foundation's executive director as Nora Calloway, who 9 months ago had been living in her vehicle with her daughter following a divorce and an eviction. She read it and set the phone down and looked out the window at the clearing. The women on the courthouse bench who had said that part they could not understand, the part about a homeless woman managing an estate of this size, the part that did not make sense to them, had presumably read the same article. Nora did not know what they made of it now. She did not particularly need to know. What she needed to know was that the woman in the second row of the library had come to Beverly's office the following morning and that the housing assistance had gone through within a week and that she had not lost her home. What she needed to know was that the scholarship letter she had received from a student named Daniel Reeves, 17 years old from a farm outside of Marshall, described in 3 carefully written pages how the education grant had paid for the tutoring that helped him pass the SAT, and that he had been accepted to NC State and planned to study agricultural science because his family had farmed this county for 4 generations and he wanted to know how to do it better. Those were the things that mattered to know. Lily planted the first seeds on a Saturday afternoon in April, working the South Slope garden with the same methodical care she brought to her field guides, reading the spacing from the seed packets, measuring with a stick, making small precise holes, and dropping each seed in and covering it, and moving on. Nora helped with the larger beds, the 2 of them working side by side in the cold spring soil, and it was quiet except for the sound of digging and the birds working the tree line, and once, somewhere above the cabin, a raven going over with the slow, heavy wing beats that ravens use when they are not in a hurry. They planted beans and squash and 3 kinds of lettuce and a row of sunflowers along the south edge that Lily said were more for the birds than for them, which was a reasonable thing to plant for. When they were done, they stood at the edge of the garden looking at the turned ground and the small stakes marking each row, and the whole plot looked like something that had been waiting to be used and was now in use, which was the correct description of it. Nora looked at her daughter. "He grew things here for 40 years, she said. Lily looked at the turned earth. "Do you think he was happy doing it?" Nora thought about it honestly. "I think he was doing the only things he knew how to do that felt like they mattered. I think that is a version of happy." Lily accepted this. They walked back to the cabin in the late afternoon light, the sun going down behind the ridge and the clearing going golden and then blue and then gray in the orderly sequence of mountain evenings. There were fireflies coming in at the edge of the hemlocks, the first of the season, intermittent and low to the ground, and Lily stopped to watch them for a minute before following Nora up the porch steps. The carved name was in front of Nora whenever she went through the door. She had looked at it every day since they arrived. She looked at it now. Calloway. 8 letters cut by a man who did not know yet who would come to read them, only that someone should. He had put them there probably on a winter afternoon in the early years, when the work was just beginning and the person it was for did not yet exist, when all he had was the plan and the patience and the particular kind of faith that has nothing to do with religion but is still a faith, the belief that something you cannot see will eventually be real enough to need a door with a name on it. She put her hand on the letters for a moment. They were smooth and cool under her palm, worn into the wood so deep that no amount of weather would take them out. That much was clear. They had been there longer than she had been alive. They would be there after her. She had been 3 years old the last time she came through this door, held on the hip of a man who knew her face and did not know what to do with that knowledge, laughing at something off camera while the mountains held their cold around the clearing and the first rooms of the vault waited below the floorboards and all of it, The gold and the coins and the silver and the mineral rights and the patient accumulating years, all of it silent and dark and ready. The way seeds are ready in the cold ground before anything is visible above the surface. She pushed the door open and went inside. The fire was going. Lily came up behind her and went to the shelf for the field guide she had been reading before they planted and settled into the chair by the hearth with the ease of someone settling into a place that has become known to her body as well as her mind. Beverly's papers were on the table, the latest round of program applications, 41 families in the housing queue and 11 scholarship applications, and a request from the county hospital about formalizing the medical assistance referral process. Nora sat down at the workbench and opened the laptop she had bought in January and began working through the applications one by one. Outside the window, the clearing was going dark and the hemlocks were dark shapes against the last pale sky, and somewhere in them the raven was settling for the night. The work was not finished. It would not be finished for a long time. There were applications on the table and letters to write, and Thomas Calloway coming back in June with a box of photographs his father had kept and a decision to make about what the foundation would fund in its second year when the first year's results came in and could be learned from. There was the question of the mineral rights generating their royalties and how to structure that income for the next decade and the decade after that. There was Lily's scholarship fund to establish formally. The one Nora had decided would be named for Robert James Calloway rather than for Harlan, because Robert had been the reason for all of it in the end, and his name deserved to be on something good. There was all of that. There was also this: a cabin on 11 acres in the Madison County mountains, with a garden going in on the south slope and a workbench with tools still sharp on their pegs and a fire that held well through the night, and a 10-year-old sitting by the hearth reading field guide descriptions of birds she had been watching all winter, as though learning their names was a way of honoring the attention she had already paid them. There was the carved name on the door. There was the room below the floor, the shelves empty now, the crates gone to their proper places, the gold moved to secure accounts, the documents to institutions that knew how to care for them. The room was just stone now, just a well-built space below a mountain, and Nora had talked with Beverly about what to do with it, and they had agreed that when the time was right they would open it, properly lit and explained, so that people could stand in the space and understand what had happened there, what it looked like when one person decided to keep building even after hope had stopped feeling reasonable, what that kind of patience produced over 50 years. Not yet. The time was not yet right for that. But it would be. She worked through the applications until the fire needed another log. She got up to add one and stood for a moment looking at the room, at Lily asleep now in the chair with the field guide open across her chest, and the fire catching the planes of her face and the shelves along the wall, with Harlan's almanacs and Nora's notebooks side by side, and the photograph on the table, the one from the trunk upstairs, the man holding the laughing 3-year-old in the clearing with the cabin behind them. She had put it on the table because she wanted it where she could see it while she worked. She looked at it now and thought about what the woman in the Cedar Hollow store had said. Here you are, with the tone of someone who had been keeping a quiet piece of faith for 15 years. Without knowing exactly what it was faith in, only that something had been asked of her and she had done it, kept the secret of a lonely man who had talked about a granddaughter once, just once, and expected that to be enough. Here she was. She went back to the workbench and kept working. The fire held. The mountains held their dark outside the window. Down in the valley, 45 miles away, the world was exactly the same world it had been 11 months ago when she had been parked behind a laundromat on Brevard Road with $214 and a rolled towel in the window gap and a daughter who had never once cried about it. And here, in the cabin at Cedar Hollow, everything was different. Not because of the money, though the money was real and it was doing real things and would keep doing them, but because of what the money had come from, which was not luck and not chance, but a man who had made terrible mistakes and kept going anyway, who had built something in the dark for 50 years for someone he could not reach, and who had written in his final letter, I hope that what I have left can do some of the work I failed to do while I was alive. It could. It would. Nora closed the last application, marked it approved, and closed the laptop. It is a good place, she said. Yes, it is. Outside. The last of the fireflies were going out at the tree line, one by one until the clearing was fully dark and the stars were out above the ridge and the mountains were the same mountains they had always been, holding the dark the way mountains do, without effort, without end. Stories like this remind us that starting over is terrifying, but it is always possible. If you or someone you love is facing a total reset right now, whether from a divorce, a loss, or a financial disaster, you need a plan. Scan the QR code on your screen or click the link below to get the Phoenix Blueprint for just $17. It gives you the exact steps you need to take in the first 48 hours and a 90-day plan to get your independence back. Thank you for watching.